I'll remind you we're switching questions now to is SETI good for society? The first thing I would note is a very similar comment came up in our group as apparently came up in this, and the difficulty that people have of separating fact versus fiction. And this is not only the great unwashed masses, but there are descriptions given of scientists having this issue as well. There's a very interesting twist on the question of, you could also ask, is SETI bad for society? And it was quite easy, or at least some members of the group found it quite easy to imagine both good and bad consequences of the process. My takeaway from it, however, was that the actual process, the scientific enterprise, or what we do as scientists, of essentially asking questions and trying to address them versus with observations, by reference to things like ALH 84001, the Martian meteorite, there is, or at least at the time, there was interest in it, and therefore, almost in a circular fashion, that means it is good for society since society is interested in it. The last is somewhat my interpretation.
All right. I think Tom's next.
Okay. Yeah, our group spent a little bit of time talking about the cultural aspects of SETI workshop that was held roughly 20 years ago, and in that workshop, it was 6 days worth of meetings with religious scholars and educational scholars and the typical SETI folks, and that group had trouble coming to grips with the impact of SETI as a search on society, and ended up bearing down on the impact of a SETI detection on society. So as our group, we came to sort of that same conclusion that there's no dramatic search. I think the question we were supposed to ask is, has SETI been good for society? So there's no dramatic effect. You can look back over these last 50 years and say it has been a dramatic change in something, but we felt there was an incremental positive change in at least a certain level of society, as represented by what we're doing here and by those who do pay attention to what we do. But we then talked a little bit about the future and whether SETI could be good for society going forward. And we came to the conclusion that we're of the belief that with the right kind of marketing effort, that it could have more influence along the line of what Eric said when he was up here at the table, and along the line of finding the next Carl Sagan type of Pied Piper, and finding the right forum in which to get that into the media. And we also all remembered that when Sagan did Cosmos, we all had 4 channels on our TV. So it's a lot different today. So.
Okay.
So I think we all agree that to the extent that SETI has had an impact on society, that the impact has been positive, really for many of the reasons that have already been discussed. Engaging the public in science, kind of a point of crystallization for questions about kind of reflecting on our own societal ills. But we also talked a lot about how we could do a better job. Some of the things that we talked about were maybe some interim goalposts or milestones in the search, so that we could sort of keep the public more informed about how the search was progressing. Also, overcoming this bias that's been discussed against presenting negative results. Maybe being a little bit more creative about our search strategy, so talking a little bit more about the actual signal types that we're looking for, and what that tells us about even if it's only in the few hundred light years close to the Earth, what that tells us about our neighborhood. And then we also talked a bit about some of the efforts that Jill has been working on with SETI Quest, and also that we've been working on at Berkeley with Thinking at Home, about engaging the public's brain in the search for ET in addition to just their CPU cycles.
We have one more.
One more. I'm paraphrasing wildly because we had some very diverse perspectives in our group. So for our question, has SETI been good for society? Perspective number 1, does it matter? Who cares? Isn't the science enough? Why do we need to justify it in terms of its good for society? And then, a counterpoint to that. And yet the questions that it does encourage us to ask are important. What is our L, for example, and how could we relate to the ultimate others? Are there things that we can be thinking about in those regards? And then the follow-on question, does SETI help us think about ourselves as a global society? Some yes, some a little bit of skepticism about that. There's the possibility, amongst other things, that in reframing it as us here, trying to speak to them, that we neglect the differences between ourselves on Earth and the imperatives of communicating amongst ourselves a little bit better through kind of a false unification. So there's that question as well. The question about public messaging projects that have been inspired by SETI came up. So I'm going to try and grasp the nugget of that. The question is, do they do something useful in terms of people expressing their hopes, fears, and desires to each other through their contributions in these messages that they're sending to the stars? And the sense is, yeah, that there's something important and valuable going on there, even if nobody out there ever hears these messages that we're sharing amongst ourselves. And then the larger question, will SETI be good for society over the very long term? This one was floated, but not exactly answered, but I think the general consensus is probably yeah.
Remember, in the Drake equation, L is the only term that we actually have an influence over. So,
It's an important.